Hello and welcome to DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Bill McQueen.
And I'm Ming Wong. Many provinces are looking at ways to balance budgets and reduce costs, and that process is starting to lead to more privatization and deregulation of services for people with disabilities. Families are being asked to take on more and more of these responsibilities. Later on today's program, we'll hear how this could affect people with disabilities.
We'll also take a look at recent developments that are making television programs and movies more accessible to people who are blind. First, here are some highlights of disability stories from the last few weeks. For students who want to study history in university, all that's usually required is a qualifying set of marks and the admission fee. And for someone with a disability, some accommodation may be required. But recently, a student in Newfoundland has been confronted by another hurdle. Paula Dyke reports.
For Nancy Parsons, it's become routine. At the start of each class, she drops a microphone on the prof's desk, and her instructors clip it on without a word. Nancy is hearing impaired, and the device helps her hear the lecture.
It's very frustrating without wearing it, like the background noise is interfering with our hearing, and like we can't lip read and write at the same time. That's why we have this microphone.
But for the first time in her life, Nancy had a teacher refuse to wear the device. And because of that, she had to drop the history class that Dr. Panjabi taught.
I found out later that it was against her religion to wear this microphone. It interfered with her balance of her inner soul and her outer soul.
Dr. Panjabi refused an on-camera interview because the matter is being reviewed by the university. But she did confirm that her Hindu beliefs prevent her from using the device. She says over the years she's tried to accommodate all her students, but in this case she just couldn't. Nancy filed a complaint with the university, and right now it's under review. She hopes something good comes of all this.
I would not want to see anybody of any kind of disability or special need to go through what I went through. It's too stressful, and I don't think something like this should ever happen again.
Paula Dyke, CBC News, St. John's.
At the end of this month, the National Strategy for Disabled Persons comes to a close. It was a federal program created to help integrate people with disabilities into all aspects of life. The strategy led to the development of projects such as Telesign, which matched sign language with computer technology. The strategy has not yet been replaced by a new initiative. However, one ministry has taken some positive steps. John Manley is the Minister of Industry Canada. A few weeks ago, he announced the development of a new office called the Assistive Devices Program Office. It's designed to help businesses develop assistive device products that enable people with disabilities to become more independent.
We've taken a sector that not that long ago would have been seen as non-economic, and we're providing it with the tools to be economically viable. And not only will that provide useful things for people with disabilities, not only will it make them more employable, but it's creating an industry in Canada, Canadian-based, with potential around the world.
Shortly after Industry Canada made the announcement, the office received more than 100 inquiries. Many people with disabilities who live in small towns or in the country need specialized adaptive equipment. If that equipment needs to be repaired or modified, it often means a long trip to a major urban center. However, if you live in British Columbia, that service may now be able to come to you. Belle Puri has the story.
It's a voyage toward community-based health care. A 4-day inaugural trip to Vancouver Island that brings a rehabilitation engineer and an occupational therapist to the patient instead of the patient going to them. First stop, Nanaimo.
The alley key will raise the whole thing up. Yeah. So that's just an adjustment we can make when Andy comes in, because he's got all the tools in the van.
6-year-old Corey has come from Victoria. Since he got a computer last October to help him talk and do schoolwork, his wheelchair has needed adjustments which could only be made in Vancouver.
We needed to have a new tray built for Corey's wheelchair so it would hold the weight of the computer. And he's changed switches from using a hand switch to a head switch. So we needed to have mounts built to hold his switches.
Now the angle of the computer needs adjustment. This time the work will be done in Sunny Hill's new outreach van. It'll take about 20 minutes.
We have all the tools we have that we would have at Sunny Hill, so quite possibly do anything we can do at Sunny Hill.
The van will be able to handle 90% of the jobs encountered on outreach trips. The workshop has a drill press, bandsaw, sewing machine, hundreds of smaller tools, nuts, bolts, and a power lift for wheelchairs.
The tray kind of hits her. Yeah. It does.
Haley has to go to Vancouver every 6 months for fittings and adjustments. It means missing school and a lot of disruption for her family. The outreach means one less stress to deal with for those who face a lot of challenges.
It's a lot easier for me to come here, which is about 5 minutes away from where I live.
It means that we can be with the crew that comes with the van, so we can see what's happening. We can give our input, as well as the parents giving their input, and things can happen right now.
The van can work in conjunction with a local facility or set up shop wherever necessary.
This vehicle can run off of a generator, and we could set it up independently if you were driving by someone's home or something and you just needed to do things, although that would be a large expense, but we could do something like that along the way or something.
The bracket made for Corey isn't quite right, but that's what the outreach is all about. Adjustments will be made right away. The province-wide service is believed to be the only one of its kind in Canada.
That's this week's roundup of disability stories.
When we come back, there's a common perception that there are too many government regulations. But if they're removed, how will people with disabilities be affected? People with intellectual disabilities require the support of social services in their day-to-day lives. Government-funded programs allow them to live independently in the community. Some parents with disabled children also get support. The idea is to keep people out of institutions. In Ontario, the current Harris government is looking at privatizing and deregulating programs. They'd also like to shift more responsibility to family and friends. But what kind of impact will this have for people with intellectual disabilities and their families? In a moment, we'll discuss this issue in depth. But first, here's a report by CBC's Robin Smythe. She looked at how the public servants strike in Ontario is currently shifting a great deal of responsibility onto one family.
We've got a little boy who's very upset, who's breaking things, who's attacking his little sister, who's attacking his big brother, who... Not door open, no.
It's been a constant struggle this week with 6-year-old Nathan. The autistic child can't understand why he can't go to school. His counselors are on strike.
No. Well,
Nathan hits himself, hurts himself, while his mother tries to calm him. Sandra Bradley worries the public service strike is a test of government plans to revamp services for disabled people.
if the families can survive the strike, and if we get through to the end and we're all still standing and the children are all still breathing, then we don't need Thistletown, and that's a bunch of garbage.
Where does my son go after
Where
that?
do they go?
Parents rallied last year to save the Thistletown Centre where Nathan gets care, but the government may still close it as part of a major overhaul of disabled services. A leaked government discussion paper shows the government is considering privatizing some services, deregulating others, making a smaller system. In the end, the government may only provide services to the most severely disabled, so-called core services.
This paper is driven towards a cost-saving and a bottom-line approach to care for children and to care for the disabled community, and this would lead to tragedies, this would lead to deaths in homes, this would lead to inadequate care.
The minister responsible insists no decisions have been made.
Really a priority for us is to make sure those services are there for the disabled community and will continue.
But the government may not provide them. The paper says families and communities should have primary responsibility.
I hope that they realize that the disabled children, like my son is, are the core services, that they require the help, that they can't get it anywhere else but from the government.
Earlier, I met with Diane Richler, Executive Director of the Canadian Association for Community Living. You've seen the discussion paper that was leaked to the press that came out of the Ministry of Community and Social Services. What are your views on the direction that government is moving in?
Well, I think the current situation in Ontario is very frightening, and I think it's representative of a trend across the country. Certainly the feeling that people with a disability and their families are expressing is one of extreme concern, and people are feeling that even though they have not had all the supports that they need, that even the little bit that they have is being threatened. And what we're seeing now is a threat of a re-medicalization of disability, so that the fear is that people will not get their social supports met, and in fact will be treated as if they're ill and eventually likely forced into medicalized institutions.
What kind of problems does this pose for people with disabilities?
The institutions, there have been two kinds. There were the large public institutions with no control and no decision-making on the part of the individual, disappearing into a huge system, usually with very little support. Or there's been a history in Ontario of private nursing homes, which brought their own horror stories, places where private owners were interested in the bottom line, and where the needs of the individual suffered because dollars were diverted from what would have gone into care and support into the owner's pocket.
Could you give me an example of someone who's living independently in the community who was once institutionalized?
I think of one institution that I visited that isn't unlike all the rest, where the activity, there were two activities that people had access to during the week from a locked ward. One was going to the canteen once a week, and the other was going for a ride on a van in the community, not getting off the van actually, but just being able to get onto the van and go for a ride. Aside from that, time was spent walking up and down the hall and watching television. And individuals who lived in that situation are now living in their own homes, reconnected with their families after 30 and 40 years of separation of hundreds of miles and 10-hour car rides, starting to own their own businesses, actually being supported during the day by people who are whose salary comes from the business rather than from social programs, and joining the Rotary Club and Kinsmen and being part of their communities.
What is support?
First of all, there may be someone who helps them do some planning, choose a place to live, choose the people that they want to live with. And it's amazing that even people who, for example, may not have any speech can be quite articulate in their body language and in a lot of other ways in terms of saying who they want to live with and who they want to have provide them with support. Somebody who has really not had any opportunity to look after themselves before may need someone with them 24 hours a day. They may need someone to help them get out of bed in the morning. They may need someone to help them brush their teeth and with their shower, or they may not. So the kinds of supports that people need can vary. But I think what the community offers to us, though, is the opportunity to provide only what's needed and no more, whereas institutional models are all or nothing. You get 24-hour-a-day support and you pay for 24-hour-a-day support.
What about the cost? Could you go into that a little bit?
If the current resources in Canada were redirected in order to encourage people to participate in the labour market, that the savings in Canada could be in the order of $4.6 billion a year. What seems to be happening in Ontario right now is that the government is looking only at the specific dollars for services. And our concern is that they have to look much more broadly. My sense is that the community has a lot to offer in terms of more cost-effective models, in terms of ways to meet the needs of more people with existing dollars, in terms of how to give people more control over their lives, and particularly in the current climate, people with a disability want to be able to be part of the workforce. They want to be able to have jobs, pay taxes. And my sense of the current discussion is that those kinds of issues have just been put aside, that the big picture is not being looked at.
I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we'll be back in a moment.
When we return, movies and television, pictures, action, plot, and description.
Going to movies and watching television is something we all enjoy. Part of the story is told through dialogue, and much of it is also told through pictures and action. Up until recently, that part of the story hasn't been accessible to people who are blind. But the situation is improving. A service that has been available in the States for about 5 years is now available in Canada.
Hi, how are you? Good, how are you? Good. Getting my picture taken.
You're getting your picture taken.
Yeah, pass this around, that's the boy. First day to get out in the yard.
It's like spring, so you have to.
When I would watch movies with my family, there was always a certain amount of difficulty because I would lean over and poke somebody, and my son or my daughter would say, "What's happening? What's happening?" And the interesting thing is they would be so engrossed, they'd be tongue-tied, and they'd say, "Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute," and waiting for the exciting thing to finally transpire before they'd turn around and they would give me a part of a description.
Self-organized here.
Jeff Eden is one of approximately 1.5 million people in this country who are blind or have low vision. Like other Canadians, he's a big movie fan.
There we go. Now here again, silence and no description. It's very difficult to determine what's going on here. I'd love to know. Love to know.
Maria Fitton also loves movies, and she's trying to keep up with current television series.
Lydia, make sure we have plenty of Silverdine.
I'd say the most confusing show right now is ER, one that I really enjoy and one that frustrates me. A lot goes on in the program, and it wouldn't be so bad if it didn't go on while music was taking place. Like they have about 3 different things going on, plus they have this heavy-duty suspense music in the back.
If you spend even a few moments just listening to a program on TV or listening to a film without watching it, you find how quickly you get lost and you don't really know what's going on. You can sort of follow a little bit of the program, but more often than not, you give up in confusion and frustration.
Mark Rosen is director for one of Canada's newest ventures that started up late last year.
Audiovision Canada's purpose is to make video-based information more accessible to people, largely people with vision impairment.
After he stopped saying, he gets it off.
Audiovision Canada and 2 other companies in the United States produce a product called Description Video.
We could take back out and make a sentence there.
You know how they have golfers on TV, and behind the golfers you hear a voice, someone speaking like this. And it's with descriptive video you hear in the background so that it doesn't describe them, it doesn't ruin the movie at all.
He points. You see that old geezer? The one in the corner? He's been stealing bolts of cloth. I saw him.
Uncle Benji looks at him, then draws him aside.
All my years in the trade, I never hired anybody to spy on the workers here.
Description video is available in 2 formats, open and closed, much the same as captioning for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Movie titles on video are only available in open format.
The description on the described version of that program is right on the soundtrack.
Torpedo hatch opens in its belly. Crystallize the weapon. The torpedo releases.
And anyone who watches that copy, the described version, will hear the description.
2 cylinders jettison from the Red October's stern and start fizzing.
For television broadcast, it's done in a closed format.
A biplane whizzes across the screen, followed by an ocean liner and a streamlined locomotive, churning out a fiery orange cloud.
The viewer at home decides whether he or she wishes to have the regular program with the regular sound or to have the program with the sound and the description.
Description video has changed the lives of Jeff Eden, Maria Fitton, and many others.
You know what else I like about descriptive video? I get to laugh at silent parts. Just like everybody else, like faking out the neighbor's kid. You know, it made me chuckle. If I didn't have description video, I wouldn't know that.
then bounds up the outside stairs to a second-floor apartment.
The analogy that I make is like having a dishwasher. Now that I have one, I don't want to do without it.
Described video has changed life for me in a very important and significant way. I have a whole new view of VCRs. I thought it was an extravagance that I was buying for my kids and my wife to enjoy.
Wars have begun that way, Mr. Ambassador.
The balding, fleshy-faced ambassador stares at him stolidly, then sets...
Now Jeff Eden can watch Hunt for Red October without feeling frustrated. It's one of a small but growing list of movies which have been described.
I certainly look forward to seeing a lot more, but I love them all. I really do. It's again, a drink of cold water in the desert.
Maria Fitton looks forward to the day when description video is the norm.
What I would like to do is walk into a theater, pick up a headphone, and you know, take it to my chair and have description going on under that headset along with the movie, and not bother anyone else, or who knows, in the long run maybe they'll all come out like that.
A catalog of descriptive videos is available from WGBH in Boston, some local CNIB viewing libraries, and soon through Audiovision Canada. For people who think they might be interested in describing videos, Audiovision Canada will be running a correspondence course in late spring, early summer. Once the demand for descriptive videos increases, they hope to hire some of their students. We'll be back in a moment.
And one final note. In a few weeks, there will be by-elections in Quebec, Newfoundland, and Ontario. 6 seats in the House of Commons are up for grabs. People with disabilities, about 1 in 4 Canadian voters, can help decide the results. For voters with physical disabilities, most voting sites now have level access. People who are blind can use a template to mark their ballots. Those who are deaf or hard of hearing can bring a sign language interpreter into the polling station. And people who can't get to the polls can use a special ballot to vote by mail.
That's our show for this week. Remember, we'd like to hear from you. Write to us with your comments and story ideas. I'm Ming Wong.
And I'm Bill McQueen. See you again next week. You can write to us at Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. That's Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. This program is brought to you in part by the Canadian Association of Independent Living Centres, promoting and supporting the development of independent living resource centres across Canada.